All right, welcome back to Lunch with EFI. I guess I'm the de facto host today, Jason Bedrick from the Heritage Foundation, and Jay Greene and Ian Kingsbury from Do No Harm. And we, of course, will have an update.
And EFI.
Right.
And EFI, of course. Well,
More
all
importantly.
EFI. So we will, of course, have an update on the Arizona school choice, the anti-ESA initiative. But first,
right, but we have to make you stay tuned.
Yeah.
The teaser.
Gotta stay tuned. That'll
Right.
be after the break.
Something in your kitchen might kill you.
After our paid promotion. After
Right.
the break. But first, Ian wants to tell us why ESAs are actually good for charter schools.
Hopefully good for charter schools.
Okay.
So David Marshall, who is a professor at Auburn University, he and I collaborated on a survey study where we sent surveys to hundreds of charter school leaders across 3 states that at this point have robust universal ESA programs. And those states were Arizona, Florida, and Utah. And we asked those charter school leaders basically what they think about, the evolving school choice landscape within those states, what effects they're feeling as charter school leaders, and ultimately what they want it to mean for the charter school movement. And I would say if there's a consistent theme, they're seeing the autonomy and flexibility that exists within the ESA marketplace, and they're saying, we want that, which is not surprising. And in fact, a significant number of them say,
I thought it was common sense that we would want a high level of regulations and requirements. I thought that was just common sense.
Guardrails.
What?
Guardrails. They call them guardrails these days.
Yeah. Don't we need guardrails? Isn't it common sense to have guardrails? You're telling me that charter leaders would rather have fewer restrictions like can be found in ESAs rather than ESAs, wishing that they could have all of the beneficial guardrails of charters?
Isn't that crazy?
That's weird.
And to be fair, I suppose that there were a minority who sort of complain in the other direction and say, we want the ESAs to be regulated the way that we're regulated. We don't think this is fair. But most of the responses, if you were to sort of organize them thematically, because they were open-ended, it was a clear majority who says, we want what they have, or even we want to go back to the old charter school model of, innovation and autonomy. Because, if we think about the history of charter schools here, I suppose there was always a little tension, even from Jump Street, where there's some people talking about, results based on test scores and driven by competition versus innovation that they would have through autonomy. And those are really separate goals. And that tension, frankly, hasn't been fully resolved.
I think Ladner actually may have written about this quite a long time ago, about the threat that private choice posed to charter schools, or I'm sorry, the other way around. The charter schools were posing a threat to private school operators in states that didn't have private school choice, particularly Catholic schools in Detroit were closing because they were facing a lot of competition from charter schools that were free while they were not free. Although interestingly, we also don't quite have a level field of competition here, because while the ESAs have less regulation than the charters, they also have less money from the state, right?
Yeah. So our report actually gets into this a little bit. Yes, they do receive less funding overall, but the charter school also has all sorts of financial obligations. They have to take in the students with disabilities. They have to pay their authorizer fees.
But if they take in students with disabilities, they potentially are eligible for extra funding for the services for those disabilities.
That's
depending
correct.
on how the state structures their funding.
Correct. Yeah. And this was actually, on the note of students with disabilities, this was sometimes a complaint or, a recognition that went the other way as well, right? That, the charter schools are receiving more funding for those students with disabilities because, in Florida and Arizona, at least, the ESA is scaled in a way that it is more for students with disabilities. But in Utah, it's not. And so that creates, an interesting incentive structure where it is, it can be maybe difficult to accommodate the students with disabilities within the private school or ESA marketplace. So,
but in the best designed ESA systems like Arizona, which doesn't seem to need additional regulation or guardrails or political protection, it appears. They do have a very intelligent system of providing additional resources for kids with additional needs. And so that's kind of how you would hope it would be set up, providing the proper incentive system to take on all kids with all kinds of challenges and provide them with appropriate levels of resources to handle those different challenges.
I think that's right.
Great design.
Right. It's funny. You always hear in the school choice, both sides of this debate are constantly saying it's not a level playing field, and the other side has the advantage. And on the school choice side, they say, look, they have the advantage because they're getting twice as much funding or more than we are. Certainly the ESA families are saying that charter schools are getting closer to parity, but still a lot less per pupil. But the public school side, or I should say the district school side, they're saying, well, we have all these regulations we have to deal with. They don't. But their solution is put more regulations on them. Make it harder for them to operate. Erect more barriers to entry because we don't like the competition. That's the troubling mindset. I would say that the big deal that there is to be made is let's reduce regulation on everybody and get somewhere closer to funding parity.
Well, I guess the question is, do you want a European corporatist model where we have, giant corporations that favor super high regulatory environments to protect them? Or do we, and super low economic growth that stagnates over decades so that every country is poorer than Mississippi? Or do we want a dynamic system where people do have to compete by providing quality services at good prices. But it leads to dynamic improvement and efficiencies. And so you end up as rich as Mississippi relative to Germany, which is weird.
So I think probably the three of us are aligned in terms of, which vision we ascribe to. But independent of that vision, there is also just sort of an interesting, political or theoretical question here, which is what is the rightful role of charter schools within this more dynamic school choice landscape? And there was a time where it's almost like they didn't need to define that because they were the only other, at least publicly subsidized game in town compared to the district schools. And now that you have, this much more dynamic landscape, well, what ought to be the role of charter schools? And, maybe one thought is actually they should be the highly regulated model. Like it's the Starbucks of school choice where it's a known quantity versus, taking a risk within a private school or a micro school. But I think the reality over time is that the market forces are going to be marching, towards innovation and towards actually giving parents what they want, and that the charter schools are going to feel a squeeze here.
Where can people find this study, Ian?
So it's published by AEI, and the title of it is The Future of Charter Schools in an Evolving School Choice Landscape.
I will say this, in states that have both a charter sector, including Arizona, which has the most robust charter sector in the country, and an ESA program, I have seen charter schools that have moved into the private sector. Great Hearts, I think, most famously. What I have not seen is in those environments, any private school that says, you know what, we're going to switch to become a charter.
Right.
The only places I see that happening is where you don't have a private school choice program and they're desperate and they switch to charters. I think we're going to see it if the Supreme Court, which last time punted on the question of can you have religious charter schools, if they go that direction and open the door to religious charter schools, I think you will see in certain states, particularly blue states, you're going to see private religious schools turn into charter schools. But otherwise, I think most of them, if they have the choice between more money and more regulation or less money, but more freedom to innovate and more autonomy, they're going to go in that direction.
Which is to say that over time, if we're going to break out the crystal ball, I actually think this does mean that we're going to see the charter sector shrink and become less relevant over time. And
actually, over time, if I really kind of look far into my crystal ball, what we're going to have is sector neutral state funding. The state is just going to pay a certain amount for kids, and there may be graduated amounts for kids with extra challenges, but there's just a dollar amount that comes with every kid. And the state doesn't care what sector that kid is in. And by the way, it's not local funding plus state. It'll all kind of be rolled up and poured back out so that every kid just has a certain amount in the state, given who they are.
And Jay, which state is going to do that first?
I think Arizona is going to do that first.
I think if I had to put my money down,
Texas.
I don't gamble, but if I did, I would put it all on Florida. We didn't do rank punditry today after the primary elections yesterday, but as we did last week. But in Florida, Byron Donalds is going to be the Republican is now the Republican nominee, and is likely to be the next governor of Florida, and that is on his agenda. He wants to essentially have one system. You want to use that money, basically everybody gets an ESA. You want to spend all of your ESA at the local district school? Fine. You want to spend it all at the local charter school? Fine. You want to customize? You want to go to a private school, have a tutor, whatever?
The only way to do this, and I don't know how, there are state constitutional issues maybe in Florida that will be challenging, is you have to roll up the local funding with the state funding and put it together into one pool and then pour it back out according to some formula based on how expensive every kid is to educate, right? And so right now, states are doing this with respect to only the state portion of funding. Yep. But that's about 50-60% of total funding. Districts are being left with 40 to 50% of the money for the kids they don't have, right? They lose those kids, but they keep that local tax resources that should be attached to those kids, which is why they can have giant empty buildings like Matt was talking about last week. They don't. The districts are a little bit awash in cash as they're losing kids, because they're keeping a good chunk of the money.
But getting back to my question, I think even within this vision of, basically total backpack funding, it's hard to envision how charter schools would compete. Like what is the structural advantage they have at that point? The only thing really maybe that allows them to compete for now is, as you mentioned, that they are getting more funding per student than the kids who are opting into the ESA program. But once that vanishes, they have more regulations, more bureaucracy. What's the advantage at that point?
Well, so the only advantage they have, which is the same advantage of district schools at this point, which is they have legacy access to facilities, right? And I mean, that was one of the real structural disadvantages of charters relative to traditional districts, is you were forcing them to be startups. You were forcing them to start from scratch, forcing them to find facilities. And like all startup businesses, startups fail at super high rates. So a lot of charters failed because it's hard to start something.
Right.
They're now pretty mature and they have legacy access to staff and facilities, but it will make it hard for that sector to grow, because that is a fixed advantage. It's not a compounding advantage.
Well, and many of them also have name brands that they can rely on as well. But they can take their buildings and their staff and their name brand and just become a private school if they so choose. If the environment, if you get funding parity and they choose between high regulation or high autonomy, why don't they just shift from charter? But anyway, it looks like people want autonomy. It looks like people want education freedom.
No, I thought they wanted common sense guardrails.
Yes. And ground zero for that is Arizona. As that brings us to our main dish, we've got a huge victory yesterday. The unions and Save Our Schools Arizona, as we know, have been trying to undermine the nation's first ESA and one of the largest ESAs in the country in Arizona by putting on the ballot a really deceptive initiative that would kick about a third of the students off the program and would impose all sorts of poison pill regulations that would make it extremely difficult to operate. And they failed to get enough signatures. They needed to get 256,000 signatures. They supposedly turned in 415,000. But the legal eagles over at the Goldwater Institute, with an assist from the real experts, Scott Musey and his team at the Arizona Free Enterprise Club, have more experience really than anybody in fighting these ballot initiatives. I mean, literally the main precedent in the state is named, I think it was Musey versus Hobbs or something like that. But it's named after Scott Musey. He was the chief plaintiff in that case, lead plaintiff. They knocked them down from 415,000 signatures to about 200.
They didn't knock them down. They confirmed that, in fact, they really only had.
Correct. But you needed, well, when I say knock them down, is somebody needed to do that work.
Yeah, right. But just to be clear, they're not engaged in some sort of anti-democratic disqualification of the voice of the people. What happened was that the signature gatherers were not following the rules or were fraudulently engaged in claiming that the voice of the people wanted this referendum, when in fact, despite spending $7 million and months of effort, they could not get enough people to sign put their signature on the referendum to get it on the ballot. And that is a failure politically, not a failure democratically. Like, correct. They could not, and getting signatures is a lot harder, frankly, than getting votes, because signatures are publicly collected. There's peer pressure on.
You mean it's easier to get signatures than votes?
It's easier to get it, right? Yeah. You could. There's peer pressure. People also, it's low cost. Like, you confront them at the shopping mall and they just want you to go away, so they just sign something. That doesn't mean that's actually what they support. And in the privacy and reflection of the ballot booth, they can express their true will. But they could not even meet that low bar.
Right. So you had tens of thousands of duplicate signatures, tens of thousands of signatures that were not of registered voters. Right. You had a whole bunch that were invalidated because they were using convicted felons. Now, this is amazing to me. They spent, the unions and SOS spent more than $7 million. But I guess, and they paid a lot of that to a group called Fieldworks to actually go out and get the signatures. But I guess they didn't get the premium plus package where they do a background check first, right? They just did the premium package, which was $7 million. But for $10 million, they could have got the background checks and made sure that they didn't have convicted felons, including, by the way, people convicted of manslaughter, of sexual abuse of a minor. They had a level 3 sex offender who collected, I think it was more than 1,000 signatures. I have to be able to check. But they had a level 3 sex offender who's not even allowed to live near children. He can't live near a school or anything. And they had him out there collecting. They had people who were convicted.
So what you're saying is the unions could hardly run public schools, so they could also hardly run a political effort.
Right. They had people kidnapping. They had people convicted of human trafficking.
These are bad. That's bad, right?
And these were the felons, but you're also disqualified if you're convicted of any form of fraud. So people that are convicted of identity theft, welfare fraud, and so on, they had these people going up on their behalf, approaching Arizona voters and saying, "Hey, can you give me your name and address, please?" Right? I mean, there was a reason,
but they were actively misleading. And people who They said, oh, this is to help people afford college or something.
Right. Or one guy said he worked for the Secretary of State's. Actually, the same guy said he worked for the Secretary of State's office. So, they got some people kicked out, invalidated their signatures because they were clearly lying to the voters. So there was a lot of this going on, and that's why they ended up with 240,000 signatures, well below what they needed. So yeah, the Arizona
this is a sign of the political strength of school choice in Arizona. That despite spending millions of dollars and months of effort, you can't get enough signatures to put this on the ballot because people like the program. They don't want to sign it. And they couldn't deceive or arm twist enough people into putting their name on these signature sheets.
This is the third time that SOS has tried and failed. They tried and failed in 2020. And this, by the way, was before they have this rhetoric. Oh, we're just against the expansion. We're for the original. No, they tried when it was the original program. They tried before the 2022 expansion to universal. They tried in 2020. Now they say we didn't get enough signatures in 2020 because of COVID, but there were a number of others that did get enough signatures that year and were on the ballot. They tried again after the expansion, and they failed to get enough signatures. This is the third time in a row, and they spent the most money this time.
It's almost as if people in Arizona really like school choice.
They like school choice. And I have to think that this was, I think, their best shot. Why do I think it was their best shot? And in some sense, maybe their last best shot. Number one, the ESA program is only growing. I know Jenny Clark, and by the way, lots of credit to Jenny Clark. Her group, Arizona Loves ESAs, did yeoman's work out there keeping the signatures down. They had people all over the state.
I thought it was the jiu-jitsu of a counter referendum.
Right. Yeah. Nonsense. I know that nonsense.
Children.
She had people out there at all these different public libraries and in front of grocery stores and whatnot. Anytime we spotted somebody that was gathering signatures, they would send an ESA parent out to say, hey, please don't sign this. This affects my kids negatively. So they kept those numbers down. But Jenny also announced that she is working on a program now to double the number. Right, the wall just got 10 feet higher. Right, she's going to double the number of kids in the program within 5 years. We're going to go from 100,000 to 200,000.
That is the greatest source of protection for school choice is the number of beneficiaries. As that number grows, and as they're networked with more people throughout the state who either you benefit, a relative benefits, or you're friends with someone who benefits, then that's how you get to the same protected status as Social Security. Part of why it survives is because everybody gets it, and because everybody gets it, everybody's willing to protect it.
So when SOS and the unions say in 2 years that they want to hey, let's try this again, we're going to have a lot more people in the program. They're actually going to have less power because people are leaving the public school system or just not being born, right? We're in the middle of the birth dearth. And so they're shrinking. We, despite the birth dearth, are growing. And
migration to Arizona.
The National Union kicked in a lot of money. Again, $7 million that was just set on fire, gone. That's $7 million that they could have put into legislative races. That's $7 million that they could have put into the governor's race, that they could have put into the superintendent of public instruction race. They don't have that money anymore. It's gone. And after losing 3 times in a row, why would a national union say, yeah, you know what, let's try it again for a 4th time. And this time we're going to give you even more money to perhaps light on fire. So I don't think that the only way really they can do it is if they get the legislature and the governor. Actually, they don't even need the governor. If they get the legislature, they could put something on the ballot without having to gather all of the signatures. But short of that, they're not going to be able to pull this stunt again.
So the real danger then to the future of ESAs in Arizona is coming from within the so-called school choice movement, right? The danger, the call is coming from within the House, and so I think we have to name names here, and there should be no ambiguity about what went on here, which is the American Federation for Children. That's their name right now. It's not Starship Federation or whatever it is they used to be called, the Alliance for something or other.
Alliance for School Choices more than a decade ago, but yeah.
So, okay. Anyway.
But get the name right, because we have the minders are watching, so make sure.
Well, I want to make sure that they hear this clearly, which is I actually don't understand why they exist as an organization anymore. I don't know why anyone gives them money anymore. I don't know why they exist as an organization anymore, because they are not helping expand school choice. They're now an advocate for a particular regulatory vision of school choice. And that's fine. It's totally legit to have a certain vision of what you think the education system should have as its regulatory infrastructure and have those preferences. But then don't call yourself a school choice movement anymore. Call yourself an education reform movement interested in sensible regulations, okay? And raise money on that basis.
I thought the Fordham Institute was already that.
The Fordham Institute or Excel in Ed, or I don't know. I mean, Excel in Ed actually is more school choice supportive, frankly. Yeah, I guess Fordham would be the kind
and
of.
And it's probably on its way to enjoying the same degree of relevance that Fordham now enjoys, which is to say, nothing.
Well, I mean, there is a lane for that, and there are donors who are interested in it, and there are some policymakers who are receptive to that message. I think it is a loser and on a downhill path nationwide and especially in Arizona. But that is a path. But don't call yourself a school choice organization anymore. Admit what you are. And the proof of that here is that at every step, AFC undermined the school choice advocates in Arizona. At every step, they did not coordinate and communicate with local advocates. They put together, without any coordination or communication, their own ballot initiative, which frankly helped the unions by getting people comfortable with signing things. Everyone's confused.
And in many cases, we had videos of them literally standing side by side, encouraging people to sign both. So they're out there right now taking credit, saying, oh, they got fewer signatures because we raised the cost of signature gathering or something. Maybe
they cornered the market on felons, you're saying?
Right, exactly. So it's that's a possible story. They have no way of proving that, by the way. Absolutely no way of proving it. But I can prove that there were a number of people that signed both initiatives because you had two people out there saying sign both. Right? We're competing, but there's a lot of similarities. And by the way, there people were using the same anti-ESA talking points about exaggerating
legitimacy to those arguments, which then strengthens the case that you should sign the other referendum.
Right. They did zero to push back on the fraudulent arguments about fraud.
Right. Then they went to after they spent I don't know how many million for this.
$5 million.
Which they set on fire. The donors, you gave that $5 million to AFC, which was counterproductive and completely failed. And if you want accountability in education, how about accountability in nonprofits? Who's accountable at AFC for that failure? Right? Why do all those people still have their jobs? I mean, honestly, someone has to be held accountable here. If you believe in accountability. So they do that, it fails, and then they go to local school choice advocates and policymakers and try to scare them into accepting very painful regulations that were contrary to long-standing principles of the local school choice coalition, which had formed the basis of the political support for this successful and fast-growing program. They said, no, your principles are wrong. You have to accept these common sense guardrails because we, your national betters, know what it is that a good choice system needs as its regulatory infrastructure, or maybe we just like these things because they're common sense. And they tried to say, and if you don't do it, you're gonna lose and suffer. And they try, and they came close to getting people to accept this through a legislative.
You can have a live son or a dead daughter blackmail.
That is right. Right. Do Do you want a live, heavily regulated choice program or one that gets killed by the unions? That was the threat that they tried to level. And much like the trans ideology, it was completely false. They were wrong. And they were wrong not because they're bad at guessing politically. They were wrong because they didn't care. They're wrong because they like these regulations. They like them on their own.
But Jay, they have a poll. They have a poll that says they're right. They have a poll that they designed all the questions and they got the answers that they wanted out of that poll, and it's very sophisticated.
Do you like common sense regulations, or do you want a Wild West? I mean, it's ridiculous. These people are unsophisticated, unaccountable, and then they fail at trying to get the political compromise. And then, okay, now we have to focus on signature challenges. And Goldwater and Musey's organization take the lead on that, and they get almost no support from AFC. My understanding is because they're angry with Jenny Clark, and it was Jenny Clark was the name of the litigation, is that she was the chief plaintiff.
Clark v. Fontes, yeah.
Okay.
Now they gave money. I don't know how much they did contribute in the end. I think it was significant. They said it was six figures. I don't have the exact amount that they gave, but then they turned around.
$5 million. $5 million.
They said we because we ran our campaign, because we ran the ballot initiative, we have a certain level of expertise that we're well positioned to challenge, the signatures. How much of that expertise was used? Zero. I don't think it gave them anything. They did cut a check, but beyond that, it was really Goldwater and the Free Enterprise Club. By the way, whom they trashed. AFC trashed the Free Enterprise Club in multiple emails and press releases. Because they didn't go along with they were the one holdout. The rest of the school choice coalition, myself included, went along with the deal. If we had gone along, there was an early version of the deal that had some regulations that were crossing red lines. We stood firm unanimously as a coalition against it. There was a later version of the deal where we took a number of those bad things out, but they were not fixes. AFC was saying, oh, these are upgrades. They're common sense fixes. They're guardrails. We understood that they were painful concessions. We were willing to take the certainty of the painful concessions over the uncertainty of what was worse. In other words, we succumbed to the blackmail.
By the way,
I'll give credit. Scott Musey and Senator Jake Hoffman said, no, we don't think they have the signatures, and they've been in the game a long time. They said they are negotiating from a position of weakness. We can beat them. And it was a gamble I wasn't willing to take. Right. But we're better off. And the ESA families are better off that they didn't take the deal, because now we are in the best situation where the program doesn't have the harmful regulations that they were trying to.
Even if they had enough signatures to get on the ballot, ultimately school choice is going to have to win. You can't win in a democracy over the long run unless you can muster political support. So over the long run, Arizona is getting very close to being a grown-up school choice program where it's going to protect itself politically all on its own, which, by the way, will deter these kinds of challenges just because it's proven that just as people stop saying, let's get rid of Social Security, because there's no point in saying that anymore. I think we're very close to that with Arizona school choice. And by the way, it would be totally reasonable for AFC today to say, look, we made a calculation and we're very cautious and risk averse. So we made a calculation that we just weren't willing to risk a really bad outcome. And we were willing to take the certainty of the painful concessions to avoid that. As it turns out, we were excessively cautious. We're glad that we were, because it's a happy outcome. But, but it wasn't unreasonable of us to be cautious. But that's not what they're saying. They're not saying we were just being cautious. They were saying we were recommending things that are so good that even though you won, you should still do them. Yeah. Right? That's how much they like these things rather than liking school choice. They don't see them as concessions. They see them as positive developments that they're advocating for, because they are a regulatory advocacy organization, not a school choice
Well, I
organization.
mean, Jay, you talk about accountability or lack thereof in the nonprofit world. Is this just maybe this is where they are because they have to spin the result that way? They just can't utter the words "we will."
No, but they're laying the groundwork for trying to regulate it in the next legislative session. They've already said, "Oh, this was a short-term victory, but they're still out there. They're still coming for you, and the long-term victory is when we pass these guardrails, and we're going to come next year. We're going to do it."
They're making the trans threat.
You need to be able to show that school choice works, and the way you do that is with a test, right? And you need to upgrade your system and have guardrails and all sorts of stuff like that.
So they have a closed market, so that people can't buy the things they want.
Right. So they're out of touch with not just the local coalition. They're out of touch with the ESA families. They didn't speak to any ESA families. They don't design policy by thinking about what actually works and how is this going. If we add this or that regulation, how is it going to affect ESA families? How is it going to affect schools? How's it going to affect the operation of the program? It's really, is this going to improve our numbers in our polls or not? Is this something we think?
I don't even think it's polls. I think they sit around and they have a planning session where they draft a model bill, a model policy, and then they judge everything off of the model policy. You know who else does that? That's like Soviet Gosplan. I do think of the wheat production and how it's going to go, and everything is off of our plan. And rather than being choiceniks, they are central planners, and they're trying to impose their central plan without learning and adaptation. I mean, it's also okay to be wrong. But to your point, Ian, didn't they have to say this? Because how could they admit that they were mistaken? They don't have to say they were mistaken. They could say they were excessively cautious, right? Which is not a terrible concession, but at least it's honest, or could be honest. And there is a point here where you cannot lie in politics over and over again and expect people to continue to trust you. Their reputation is terrible because not only did they do bad things in the past, but they're lying about it today. And the lie is to claim, we did it. We saved it. We did it with our referendum. We did it with our common sense guardrails. If you lie, you fend off the anger of a donor for today, but long run, you undermine your mission, and that undermines if your mission is a school choice organization, which I think they aren't. So donors, if you like school choice, give to an actual school choice organization. If you like regulations, if you want, if you work for Class Wallet and you think that they should have monopoly control over, who could buy what, great, go ahead, donate to them. But otherwise, I don't know why people are donating to them.
Jay, how do you really feel?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I have nothing to lose here. I've been involved in the school choice fight for most of its modern history. I mean, its modern history kind of, it starts in 1990. I got in this, 1993. Okay. And I've just been seen enough of this stuff that I don't see any reason why we shouldn't try to police ourselves. Because part of why it's taken so long to get as far as we have is because we've made terrible mistakes without anyone willing to call out the mistakes, learn from it, and adapt. And I even edited a book on this called Failure with Mike McShane, where we tried, let's reflect. It's okay to be wrong about things. Let's reflect on what we've gotten wrong, how we could try better.
Right.
And I don't see that in these organizations, which is a real problem.
Look, if I were to steelman their argument, okay, it's that, look, and actually this is pretty close to what Patrick Graff over at AFC has been saying on Twitter for the last couple of days. His argument is, look, you locals, you won, but you won barely, okay? You were very close. This could have come out, if the judge had ruled slightly differently, 10,000 signatures go another way and they just barely make the ballot, and then you're in for the fight of your lives. And you've got a political problem on your hands. And the only way to, you've got this perception that the program is rife with fraud. And it's, fine. It's not. It's less than 1%. And we're making improvements on that every day. But there's a perception. And so we need to have some sort of common sense guardrails that are in place that reduce the fraud even more, and that make it so that we can show
from 0.1 to 0.05% or something.
Right, exactly. And show that it works. Here's the thing, though. This is assuming that the other side is arguing in good faith. Okay. Let's say you had 10% fraud and you got it down to 1%. You think they're going to stop hammering on you? No, we're at less than 1% and they're still hammering on us.
It also is politically unsophisticated. Why? Medicare has much higher fraud rates than ESA. Much higher. Okay. But no one wants to get rid of Medicare. In fact, many people are advocating for Medicare for all. Why? Because tons and tons of people, including politically powerful people and sophisticated people, are beneficiaries of Medicare. The protection against the accusation of fraud is mostly the scale of your beneficiaries, not common sense regulation.
The point is, there is no regulation that we can implement that is going to stop the other side from trying to undermine the program. Right? They're just going to, they're going to smell blood, and they're always going to ask for more, and they're always going to ask for things that are going to undermine the program. And there's nothing that we can do programmatically that is going to stop that. So what we need to do is design the program to work as well as possible and to serve as many people as possible well.
Grow rapidly.
It's got to be the goal. And that means the regulatory death by 1,000 cuts actually impedes our ability to have political sustainability. So the funny thing is, they think they're much more sophisticated than the local school choice coalition. I see the opposite. I see their strategy as extraordinarily unsophisticated, unrealistic, utopian, and gives the opponents essentially a heckler's veto, whereas the locals actually understand the local political environment. They understand the political environment in the state legislature, and they understand what makes a program successful.
Well, and part of also how we learn what is successful or not successful. I mean, no one knows a priori, right? All the right moves politically for these things. Right. But we do it by trial and error and learning. And the most efficient way to do that is with decentralized decision making. And the problem with the AFC approach is that they're trying to impose a national model. They're the model policy that they dreamed up in a retreat at a 4-star resort somewhere. That's rather than saying, well, look, Arizona, why don't you try what you think? Local people, try what you think is going to work. And there's some chance you're going to fail. Okay. And if that happens, we're going to learn what not to do for every other place. Okay. And so again, you can't have guaranteed zero political risk. And so you can't, if you try to centrally plan that out of existence, you guarantee that the program can't thrive, grow, and protect itself over time. It will be forever dependent on the largesse of the AFC and whatever deals they can strike with unions.
Right. Well, we, I think, have gone a little over today.
No dessert.
No dessert today. I think the main course was sumptuous enough that we don't even have room for dessert, but we'll have to save Jay your 2 scoops of maternity desserts, or sorry, 2 scoops of maternity desserts for the next time.
Well, I mean, if it's dessert, you want 2 scoops.
Yes, exactly. Desserts you don't. If they actually exist, as Jay will explain next week. So good to see you all.
And by the way, we invite our AFC overlords, who are monitors, come on the podcast, explain your situation.
Sure.
Explain it. I mean,
they didn't take the opportunity when I asked them specifically, because they use these euphemisms, guardrails, upgrades. I said, here are 3 things that you have proposed. Here are the effects on parents as I see them. The ESA parents don't like them. How are they upgrades? I got radio silence. Once you start getting into specifics, they actually don't want to talk about it. They'd rather use their happy poll tested buzzwords. But yeah, you're welcome to come on. But also, it looks like we've run out of time again for our paid promotion. Yet again, we have to remember to include that because we keep running out of time and not getting to the paid promotion. But maybe
how else will we be able to monetize?
Yes. Yes. Right, because that's what we're in this for, right? But anyway, so good to see you all. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.